Welcome back to the KDPG Sunday edition. This morning we're talking about a compelling series of articles in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette dealing with the plain people, those of the Amish and Mennonite religions, and the sexual abuse that does take place within those communities. The reporters who are working on those stories and this series are joining us this morning. They are Peter Smith, who is the religion writer for the Post-Gazette, Shelley Bradbury, the public safety reporter for the PG, and Stephanie Strasburg is the Post-Gazette's photographer on this assignment as well. Joe Smito of the Post-Gazette is here, and you've got the next question.
I wanted to ask whether most of the cases of abuse that you found were within families or as in the case of the Catholic Church, some church official to a child.
The structure of the plain churches is very, very different from the Catholic Church, where, first of all, the Catholic Church is a hierarchy. You have a Vatican, a central address where you can reach someone. The are in many different denominations. Their congregations are self-governing. There is no professional clergy, no seminary-trained clergy. These are people that might be truck drivers or farmers or mechanics by day, but they also are elders governing the congregations. So it's a very different dynamic. Much of the abuse that we have heard of has happened within the families, but not only. Sometimes it's happened, just within the congregation or among neighbors, and in some cases, trusted adults who are in positions of some authority or other within the churches, but the predominance is within the families.
If I read correctly part of what you reported, for some of these people who become abusers, it's because that's what they've known through their life, and it's such a closed community that they really don't know that this is not the right way to do things. Am I phrasing that correctly?
It's one of the tragic cyclical parts of the story that you have victims who become perpetrators. Or become enablers in some cases.
And there's so little sexual education, there's so little, if any, education about the body. A lot of times people would come forward and say, I didn't even realize what was going on. I didn't even realize I was being abused because I wasn't educated to know that that was wrong or what that part of my body was. And that's one of the things that activists are really trying to change.
I found it interesting that one of the quotes from Ms. Burkholder that Mrs. Burkholder that we used before in your series of reports here is that when she was having sex with her boyfriend and then marriage, she was really looking for love, and she knew this wasn't love, but this was something she was supposed to have to do. I found that kind of interesting. The other part that we're going to hear from a woman by the last name of Metzger. Tell us a little bit about her.
Trudy Metzger grew up in a Mennonite community in Mexico and then in Canada, where she lives now. Suffered horrific abuse with multiple perpetrators, and as she began to speak out, she began to hear from others, this happened to me too, and she realized this is systemic and something needs to be done. She founded an organization called Generations Unleashed, and on any given day she's agitating for reform or kind of investigating a tip into a new abuse case.
But what we're going to hear from her now, I believe, is that it is not easy to change this community. This is Trudy Metzger.
If we admit that we have 20% among us who are arrested, we have to also say it isn't working. That's pretty scary for a culture. When that's so much a part of your identity. I mean, we made our own clothes. We were supposed to try to make them as modest as possible and not too fancy and all of these things. When you look at one of the core issues of what you're built on, and you have to question that, it really risks crumbling everything. And I think many are actually afraid of that because they don't want to lose their culture. And I understand that. There's many things in the Mennonite culture that they're incredible. If you take away the religious piece and make it just about faith in Christ, that's like faith in Christ that I've experienced anywhere else. It's really not that different. If you take away the clothing piece, like the very strict rules about the clothing piece, I mean, that's culture. But if you take that sense of community and you look at people who meet Sunday after Sunday, they're there for each other, they have dinner together, there's a strength in that many of us don't know. You're not lonely, you have people all the time, but there's an inner loneliness that is being missed because of all the abuse and the neglect that's happening emotionally.
So to what extent is there right now an acknowledgement within the plain community that there is a problem and what internally and externally is being done about it?
We're starting to see some change now, especially we saw that in Lancaster County. When we went out there, that's one of the largest populations of plain people in the state, obviously, and there was a definite recognition among the community there, the plain community there, that this was a problem and it was a growing problem, and that they needed to do more than they'd been doing in the past. They have this committee that's formed out there, a conservative crisis intervention committee, which is a board of Amish and Old Order Mennonite elders who are working with the law enforcement and the child services out there to ensure that abuse reports make it out to those outside authorities. And they say, you know, the Amish and Mennonite community is not different than anyone else. We don't need any special treatment. We want to deal with this as much as the outside law enforcement does. So they have kind of intentionally built up extra communication out there.
But in the past, the law enforcement, didn't it kind of just let the community police it on its own? To a degree?
Another way of looking at it is they didn't know what to investigate.
Okay.
You know, and this is something we're learning in society as a whole, just how insidious this crime is, because it happens behind closed doors. Victims are intimidated, even if they understand that what's happened to them is a crime. So, you know, there was a judge in Ohio, in Amish country there, who was saying, I haven't had an Amish case come before this court in 30 years, and now I've had 2 in 1 week. And the reason is, we all know why. It's because the Amish like to take care of this among themselves. But in this case, somebody stood up and said, they're not taking care of this, and this needs to be reported, so here we are.
After the grand jury report on the clergy abuse in the Catholic Church, you know, when the grand jury issued that report, it also issued some recommendations for changes in laws to kind of prevent this kind of scandal from happening again. The legislature hasn't acted on those changes, but they're still under discussion. Would any of those proposed reforms make a difference to the problem in the plain community?
In the way that it would make a difference with others, if they extend the criminal statute of limitations, which already are pretty extensive. The criminal statutes right now allow someone to bring charges up to age 50 going forward. If they eliminate that entirely, that will open that avenue. If they create a window in the civil statutes of limitations, which is something, as we know, the dioceses have fought pretty fiercely against, because that would call them to account for decades of actions, to the extent that that could also enable, say, a former Amish or Mennonite to challenge an institution or a church, any sort of faith-based institution, and say, hey, this happened to me under your watch, then yeah, that could have an impact.
You mentioned that the communities of elders, and especially in the Lancaster area, are now starting to have their own system of working with the authorities there. How much resistance is there within these communities right now to even go to that degree?
Yeah, that sort of depends on who you talk to. Some people, like the elders, will say, you know, we are being much more open about this. We don't get much resistance from people. But other people who we've talked to have said, you know, even the elders acknowledge that they're walking this tightrope between sort of the older traditional approach to this, where it's handled within the church, and this new sort of modern, we're going to send this outside the church to be dealt with law enforcement. So the answer to that question is kind of, it's mixed. And I think it's important to remember that every church is its own little island in this community. So the leadership from one pastor can really impact one church, but it doesn't necessarily translate to the whole community.
Exactly. Well, very quickly, we have to go, but we brought up the soundbite by Ms. Pate, who brought the charges against her father. He was convicted, is that right?
He was.
Yeah, and was
He
given
is
a
in
sentence.
prison as we speak, yes.
Right, right. Thank you so much for being with us this morning on the KDPG Senate Edition. Joe and I'll be back with some final thoughts in just a moment.